Welcome to Gray Maybe, a podcast and social experiment based on this season's topic, abuse. My name is Jillian Schmitz. I'm a professional dancer, actor, teacher, author, artist, mother, and cat lover. Through my own personal journey of recovery, I've found that things aren't just black or white, or a simple yes or no. For me, in my recovery, there has been mostly gray area and a lot of maybes. In most of my stories, you can find the gray maybe. I will be sharing my own process through personal stories and interviews with others in an effort to destigmatize, bring awareness, and find recovery from many types of abuse. If you'd like to share your story, please email graymaybestories@gmail.com. graymaybestories@gmail.com. Before we get started, if you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're using to catch future episodes of Gray Maybe. A note before we begin. My stories and the stories of others on this podcast are told through the lens of our own experience. The revelation of our process is ours to tell. If you disagree with the views or stories on this podcast, know that we are not speaking on anything other than our own experiences and viewpoints. Take what you like and leave the rest. Nothing expressed or mentioned in this podcast is an endorsement or is meant to be taken as advice. It is strictly the sharing of our own experiences and our own recovery. Any feelings this podcast activates in the listener is for the listener to process and recover from. Any criticism you have based on these experiences and choices are yours, and they are not anyone else's burden to carry. Trigger warning: sexual abuse, sexual assault, rape. Welcome back, everybody, to Gray Maybe. It has been a minute, but we're back. I'm back. Roderick's back. Producer Roderick is back. And I have someone very special to start out the season with. This person is someone I've really enjoyed working with over the years, not just working with, but also, and having as a peer on jobs, but also really looking up to professionally and just having the time of my life with this person. And also socially, I've gotten to know them really well. We have a lot of things in common. We like to talk a lot. We're interested in a lot of deeper topics. And so without much further ado, I really want to introduce Scott Hislop to the podcast. Scott's actually a fan of the podcast. You have listened to the podcast, and you were like an early listener too, like right out the gate. And you were like posting about it. All the love to Scott because he loves the podcast. And that was like all that support meant the world to me and to the podcast. It's been really, really lovely. Scott is a dancer. He's a choreographer. He's a choreographer's assistant. He's probably a producer. He is a father, dad person. He's a fantastic dancer. I said dancer, but like a fantastic dancer and all around very cool human being. So Scott, welcome to the pod. Will you introduce yourself and anything you want to add?
Oh, God. Well, all those things. Thank you very much. That's very sweet and kind. Survivors of abuse don't really talk about themselves. So.
Yeah, it's not the favorite. It's like, here, look at me, look at me.
Right. We get small. We get very small with these things. But no, all of those things. I host some.
Yes, that's right. Oh my God. Wait. Yes, you host. And also, I wanted to make sure I brought this up because I was very affected by your one-man show. Can I call it a one-man show? Yeah, in the Fringe Festival a long time ago.
10 years ago.
10 years ago. I watched it live, and I was like, oh my gosh. Like, he did this one-man show that was so incredibly courageous and thoughtful and provoking and gut-wrenching and mesmerizing. It was so good. I was so invested in every second, and I was so like I already was like Scott's, the GOAT. But then that's like next level because you acted in it, you wrote it, everything about it was just so incredible. And when you see something like that and see someone do something like that, it opens your mind to like, oh wow, like what could I do, or what could other people do, or what can be done, right?
Yeah.
And that was one of those moments. So I have to mention that. What was the
Mm.
name of the one man show?
It was called "I Want to Bury My Testimony." It was about growing up gay and Mormon. The uh, it was a little bit of a pun because when you once a month Mormons get up every Sunday, and not once one Sunday every month, Mormons get up to bear their testimony. And as a kid, I always thought it was the words were, "I want to bury my testimony." That's what
Ah,
I would always used to say, and so it ended up being kind of apropos for the title of the show
I
because
love
kind of
that.
I yeah. But and it this that because what we're talking about today, it's probably going to come up my one man
Hmm.
show. There's a
Good,
little bit of there's some connections there, so
good, because that
we'll
show was
mention it again.
amazing.
Thank
I
you.
would. I hope you do it again some way. If you put it on film, if it's not already on film, if it's on film, let's link a way for people to see it. Um, it was fantastic. It was so good. Um, you made a joke about how we like to get small. Like I've noticed in myself as a performer, I only want to be watched when I'm ready to be watched.
Yes.
Like it's like no, I'm on right now. You can watch me, and then when I'm off, like don't fucking look at me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm very
Oh
like
yeah.
I feel like we're all that way. Like we're fine being like gazed at and examined, but only when we're offering and willing to do it in that moment. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
kind of like very intrusive. So
Yes.
thank you for being willing to be gazed at today.
What did you call me?
I know, right? So this season is about abuse, and I decided that topic after the election for very obvious reasons. If you know me personally, you know exactly where I stand, and it felt very appropriate and it felt very powerful for this season to be talking about that. And I wanted it to be very broad in the topic of abuse, mostly because I love variety in all of the topics I've done. I want a lot of variety because I want to have as many people feel seen as possible, right?
Mm,
Like, I want
hmm.
as many people listening to feel like they earn their seat at the table of whatever we're discussing. I think for myself, I my first reaction is to discredit why I don't belong at the table, why my situation is different, and
Mm,
why I don't deserve to have the things, the recovery, the whatever of the situation. And so I want to hit all of the avenues that I can so that people feel like, oh no, I deserve a seat in this area or this spot over here. So we're starting off with your story and your experience, which you told me you were willing to give last February. And it
hmm.
stood out in my mind as like, absolutely, that has to happen. How can it happen? I had no intention of doing this season this soon, but then this happened and you came to my mind immediately. And I was like, I hope he's still willing. Um, and so without me blabbering much more, will you start to tell us a little bit about your story or your
Yeah.
experience with this topic?
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting perspective, mine, because uh, the abuse happened a long time ago, the early when I was very young, but it didn't come out until more recent. And I think that's pretty common to be locked away.
Very.
I've in all my research and my recovery and my healing, I've found out how common it is, and I want to be clear by saying it surprised me more than anyone. It really did. I did not expect. I I would have, if I had known this was there, I would have tackled it a long time ago. I'm the type of person that wants to walk through the fire. I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to heal from it. I'm going to learn from it. I'm all of that. And so for this to start to bubble up uh, 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, it just rocked my world. Even though there were signs, there was writing on the wall my whole life. So many things clicked. So many things started to make sense. a big piece of the puzzle was like, oh, hello. Okay, I digress. So I'll talk about the abuse, and I'll talk about how I it did start to rear its head, and I'll talk about my process of
Right.
of of what's happened since. Um, so the I basically I was 4 years old, and I was sexually assaulted multiple times by my uncle. Um, and It happened in the dead of night. I don't know how many times. I don't know how many nights. I know it was more than one night.
Right.
Um, and I don't know who knew about it. That's pretty tough.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I can't say it wasn't dealt with, or he was removed,
Hmm.
but I I wasn't dealt with.
Right.
Um, this is very, and it's a very common Mormon story too, by the way. P.S. Put a pin in that. Um, I had just turned 4 years old, so this happened between. It happened the week between Christmas and New Year's,
Mm.
um, and my birthday is December 20th. My birthday happens right before Christmas. Um, I know that I don't. How graphic can I get?
You
Can
can
I
get as
get?
graphic as you want to get. There's a trigger
Okay.
warning on this
Okay.
episode previous, so people know to be warned, and it's completely up to you as how much you want to say or not say.
Okay. Um, I the so sorry. Um, let's go back. When I about 4 years ago, a little over than 4 years ago, and I do want to say, I think there was a prep period for this to even start to bubble up. I had done significant work on myself about 4 years leading up to that. I don't think this would have come out had I not done that. So I was already sort of working with therapists, and not to uncover abuse. Again, this was all hidden to me. This was locked away. But working on other parts of my, just I was working on myself pretty vigorously, with several different specialists, and because something was wrong, and so there was a good amount of sort of priming that happened, and I was in a good space. This is 2020, so we're in 2020. It was the year of the pandemic. Um, I was meditating my ass off.
Mm.
I was in such a good place, and I was centering myself, and I was, really doing a lot of internal work, if you will. And I got to this point where it just sort of hit something hard, and like my meditations wouldn't work anymore. I was really calming my mind before that, and all of a sudden it went clink. It hit something, and then nothing. Like I was like, why aren't my meditation, like I couldn't just, my mind would just be crazy when I would try to do my meditations. And all the chatter just went crazy. And I was like, I was doing so well before. Why? I was meditating twice a day at this point, and it just hit something. It wasn't until about a year later when I realized I think I had gotten as far as deep as I could go. And when like when in the movies or the cartoons, when they're like digging for the treasure, or digging for the gold, or digging for the grave, and all of a sudden they hit blink,
Tink.
and I think that's what happened.
Yeah.
I think I got to this locked away box, and I was like, what's happening? What is that? Why can't, why is everything was going back. I was taking backward steps.
Hmm.
And then shortly after that, so this is very beginning, this is January of 2021. I'm a date person. I love dates. I'm very good at remembering things, by the way, by how I associate it with dates. Um, I call them fragments. I just started getting these fragments. They were like needles in a haystack. Um, and they were very specific. There was a, sort of like what I call a moving picture. like it was male, someone with shoulder length hair looking over his left shoulder. And it kept on happening all the time. Just like it'd be waking dreams almost. I'd just go into my day. I'm like, what is that? What is that?
Mm-hmm.
And the face was all blurry.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't see the face, but that was one of them. And it wasn't of any, like sometimes you can see images or pictures because they're pictures that exist in your
Right.
family's like old picture books. It wasn't anything like that, but it was just someone sitting down and looking over his left shoulder length hair. And I was like, why does this keep on coming to me? Then another thing that would happen was not every time my husband and I were intimate, but sometimes when we were intimate, this very clear, disturbing, graphic picture would it would scare the hell out of me and it wouldn't happen all the time we were intimate, but a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times. And you'd be like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "I don't know, I don't know, I don't know what that is." And it just kept happening. It's very specific. The same one, the same sort of visual. Um, and just those two things right there, they were just happening with more and more speed, or like the time in between was getting smaller and smaller. And then there were a couple things like health elements that I've always had in my adult life, um, that kept on kind of pinging me. Like, what is that? What is that?
Like little flare ups and stuff.
A little, just the remembering. I'm like, why do I have that, or what is
Mm.
that? And like, I'd been to specialists about it.
Mm.
And, one was specific about the throat.
Mm.
Um, and so these things were just kind of haunting me. And I'm the type of person that listens to those messages. I think it's our body's way, our spirit. Something is like saying, "Hey, investigate. There's something going on." And I got sick of feeling crazy, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Because I started to go, does this mean something? What
Mm-hmm.
is that? And then I was like, no, you're crazy. You're so dramatic, Scott. Because I can be one that can be a little dramatic. And so,
No
and
way. You and I are both like that. And we're also both like, we'll talk ourselves down logically to a place
yes,
of we don't qualify. Well, it's not a big deal. Like
yeah.
literally, yeah. Go on.
And that got kind of tiresome, because I was like, why is this happening to me? And if something's happening, I want to know. I don't want to ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally, I started to seek professional help, very specific professional help. And it it wasn't hard, because I think I'm so open to these things anyway, to investigate and to find out. And curiosity has always been one of my traits.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it came out pretty quickly. Um, and once you start to open those floodgates, stuff, if you go searching for stuff, it
Yeah.
tends to reveal itself. And it did.
Mm-hmm.
And the face of that male that would look, it started to fill in.
Mm-hmm.
And I went under, you know,
Yep.
I went, I investigated that way with the help of a specialist. And then stuff really started coming out. It turns out it that locked away box
Mm-hmm.
was something that protected me
Yeah.
until it doesn't,
Right.
right? Until you start to go, oh, this is actually an impediment in my life. This is
Right.
actually um, all of the things that some of all of those things, those traits, those attributes about yourself, that it turns out they're all connected.
Right.
And so in when I when I went under to sort of help me bring this stuff up, um, I saw very clearly. I remembered very clearly certain things. I
Mm-hmm.
remembered the grooming process. I remember the touch of the leather couch. on me. I remember the feelings I had. I remember actual moments. I remember all of the playfulness. Um, I remember the colors of the chair across the room. Um, and I didn't at that time remember the happening, except I would just get flashes in the dead of night. I knew I was in my bed. Um, and then the next very clear, I have such clarity about it, memory is the feeling of my throat hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know I was violated. I know I was orally raped.
Mm-hmm.
I also had so many problems here
Mm-hmm.
my whole life. My tonsils got taken out right couple of months after that. Didn't know it was connected to that, but there was a big flare up. And I had all of these problems ever since my tonsils were taken out, sinus issues and stuff. Um, but I remember being in pain and I remember crying out and I remember my mom coming in and sending my uncle away.
Mm-hmm.
That's very clear.
Mm-hmm.
It in the next several months, within a year after that, other things would sort of like trickle out.
Mm-hmm.
Just in the middle of the day, sometimes during a meditation. Um, one time I was laying in my bed and there was a very clear memory of,
Mm-hmm.
a game that he was playing with me when I was in my bed. But I had a smell, very clear smell memory of his privates. Um, uh, and so little things would trickle out. It wasn't actually, and I'll skip forward a little bit. It wasn't actually until, and then it stopped. And there's the memories of actually, and it was all process and work and therapy and whatever. But interestingly enough, and I thought it was sealed shut. I never thought I would remember any of the during. I thought that like not that. I guess I assumed because it had been so many years that any sort of memory was sort of leaked out, if
Right.
you
Or like
will.
through self preservation, like people who have been in car accidents don't remember the actual accident,
Right.
because it's so
Yes.
traumatic, and it never comes back. They're just like, oh, yeah, I just woke up in the hospital or something.
And interestingly, last month I had a big
Oh, wow.
upload, if you will.
Mm.
I was out of the country, and it's so funny, and I think, and maybe it's because maybe you're allowed to, maybe the body preserves it until maybe you're ready or able to process it. I don't know, but I was out of the country, and I read one sentence. I was reading on my laptop, and I read 4 years old, and it just went click, and
Mm.
all of these memories of actual during the which I'd never had. I had the before, and I had the directly after, but I'd never had during, and they came out a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fascinated by it. I was just like, huh. And I was just sitting there in my hotel room and it was just like sort of registering click, click, click. And all of these moments, these sort of vignettes, these moments were just sort of available to me. And I was remembering in real time. And I'm fascinated by this stuff. So because some people are like, oh, I wouldn't want to know. But I've always, the more I know, it just
Yeah.
helps me.
When you had
I want to
already
know.
kind of started down this journey and had some support in unpacking. So I
Yes.
feel like you also had like a baseline of understanding and acceptance to kind of really go
Yes.
full ham. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and it was just so crazy. Just that one word, 4 years old. I read those three words, and it just went. It opened up, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, kind of. Time is fuzzy, even though this was a month ago. I don't remember how long I was sitting there, but I was just like, kind of processing all these memories, just sort of like adjacent to it, not in my feelings or anything like that. And and then they drifted, and I was like, no, 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 I want more, I want more. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, wait, just go into your body, go into your body. And I went like this, and then I had the worst panic attack of my life.
Oh
Like
my gosh.
the room started coming in. I started
Right.
hyperventilating.
Oh, wow.
I couldn't stop crying.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't see. Thank God my dear friend was out of, there
Mm-hmm.
with me in a room, two rooms down the hall.
Mm-hmm.
And I called her and I was like, can I come over? And she's like, yeah, of course. And I came over and I collapsed and
Mm-hmm.
it took a long time for me. She's like, you have to breathe because I couldn't breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And she knew. She's my good friend, so
Mm-hmm.
she knows about the abuse story, and uh, and it just, I mean, it kind of bowled me over. I I was so fascinated by it, and then as soon as I was like, well, wait, go into the feeling. Because I was just trying to get more, and
Mm-hmm.
I just turned into a scared, traumatized 4-year-old,
Yeah.
and the next day I was so tired. And I was like, do
Yeah,
you
you
think
were
it's good? She's like, yeah,
emotionally
Scott. She's like,
hungover.
yeah. She's
Yeah.
like, Scott, your body was holding on to that for how long? And then you
Yeah.
released it. And
Yeah.
I was like exhausted.
Yeah.
So anyway, blah, blah, blah. That's the abuse, or that's as far as much as I remember and how it came out, sort of the sort of two time spans that it came out. Now, very quickly after this did come out, and so I'm in 2021 now. I'm putting these pieces together. It dawned on me very quickly that I went, okay, how has this affected my life?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I need to know how this has affected my life, and I need to know where it's affected my life, and I need to know all this sort of stuff, and I need help for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into therapy, which I've been in ever since, and that has been a journey. And it turns out, Jillian, turns out it affected my life in every way
You
imaginable.
don't say. Well,
Yeah,
you say how it affected my life, but it's how did it change who I was, right? How
right.
how did it? Who would I have been had I not
Who?
had this?
Oh, they're like
Which, like,
you're
I don't mean to like really throw people because it doesn't have to be. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. You can look at it and be like, part of I feel like surviving stuff like this is grieving who I could have been without this bullshit, right?
holy shit. I mean, I went. There's so many stages that I went through. I mean, you really kind of go through the what is it? The seven
Yeah.
stages of grief. You really
Which
do.
the interesting thing about the seven stages of grief last season, we talked about grief, and Jada's like, "Oh, that's bullshit. It's not actually a
Ah,
thing. Like you
yeah.
feel all of them, but it's like not. You don't
It's
like."
not a per linear.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She's
Right.
like, it's everybody thinks, but yes, you're going to
That
go
makes
through a
sense.
roller coaster.
I went through a roller coaster, and that grieving who you thought you. I mean, it's a big grief. I mean, let's fall of 2023. I kind of went through this whole like my life has been wasted,
Oh,
and I mean, talk about the sadness that sort of comes with that, because you start to think, well, who was I supposed to be?
hmm
And I guess I'll backtrack a little bit. I mean, just my experience, and I don't have a lot. I don't have the most perspective of sort of the process, because I mean, really, I'm still kind of in it.
hmm
Um, and I've moved through. I think I've moved through the darkest of it. I'm pretty sure I have, but who's to say what's next? Um, uh, but it so I think it whittles down to this: when you're 4 years old
hmm
and something of that magnitude that's just classified as, because what does a 4-year-old know? It's bad. It's bad that happened. What happened to me was bad. Even if there were like, even if it was playful, and even if there was pleasure in it, which I don't know that there wasn't. I don't know.
right.
And there's those, you start to like you start to like sort of ask these really tough questions. And how did that inform, who I am? But when you're 4 years old and something like that happens to you, and no one is there to pick up the pieces. How does a 4-year-old process that?
Mm-hmm. They don't.
They don't.
They bury it like
And
treasure,
so,
like a cartoon.
so basically, your whole operating system, if you will, like if we're tech computer talk, your
Mm-hmm.
whole operating system is born from that
Mm-hmm.
darkness and that
Mm-hmm.
trauma. And basically, it took me years to whittle it down to, but it whittled down to I am bad.
Yeah.
I'm bad because adults don't do bad things
Mm-hmm.
when you're 4.
Right.
Um, you are bad. I'm bad. And so everything that you are looking for, wishing for, hoping for, aspiring to, they all become sort of reflections of, well, first failure. Oh, failure, it just goes back into I'm bad, I'm
Right.
bad, I'm bad. Successes don't mean anything.
Right. Because you
Um,
believe you're ultimately bad. Yeah.
I'm bad. I'm not worthy. It's
Yeah.
worth. It's self-worth
Right.
is sort of built on this cornerstone of being small and being bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, it's funny. We talked uh, Julie Schmidt, who was a
Yes, she
podcast
has.
guest of
Yes.
yours.
Mm-hmm.
She always has caught me, for years, and she'd be like, we'd be talking career, and I'd be like, I would just sort of shit on my career, and
Mm-hmm.
she'd be like, Scott, I would kill to have your career.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
it was never good because
Right.
everything that you're trying to do um, just isn't good enough. You're trying to fill this hole that you don't even,
Right.
first of all, I didn't even know was there,
Right.
which is the whole sort of,
Right.
just screwed up thing about this.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know it was there. And you're trying to fill this hole with things, with things, with things, with things, with things um, that will never amount to
Right.
making it right.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, what I needed to be was parented.
Right.
And I had to parent myself these past 4 years, which was arguably the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
Yeah, it's harder than parenting, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it turns out parenting yourself is harder than parenting someone else. And I'm so glad you brought that up because in a lot of recovery, regardless of what you're recovering from, a lot of people talk about having to reparent themselves as an adult and that
Yeah.
it's a lot of work and it can be very rewarding, but that's the thing, guys. Like you can reparent yourself. I suggest you do it with some kind of a 12-step or a therapist, the help of that. But like a lot of times when we didn't get what we needed in childhood, whether it was attention, something as basic as attention or the right kind of love or whatever, but also if no one stood up for us when we needed it, if we were unseen, if we had, various types of abuses or grew up in chaotic households, like these are all opportunities to reparent ourselves so that we can continue to like move on, move past, move through all those things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my, my operating system was shame,
Yeah.
shame with a capital S.
Mhm.
And about 4 years ago, a little less, when I, you know, started really seeking the help of a therapist about this. I've been to therapy before, but about this specifically, his maybe our second, third, fourth session, he said,
Mhm.
Scott, I want you to know what life is without shame.
Mm.
And
Tell me, I need to know.
I'm still figuring that out. And it's basically
What did he
been
tell you? Tell me.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I think I'm just starting to to figure this out. I went through something pretty heavy um, this summer, and I liken it to, I go back to that first image of sort of getting to the metal clink.
Mhm.
I think the past 3.5 years I've been working hard to dig this thing out,
Mhm.
and I came to this place this summer where I felt I got it out. I got shame out. It's and it's been, my sole mission for this last, you know, 3-4 years, but I felt like I got it out. I pushed it out, and then I'm standing in this hole that I've created, and I can't get out because I used to be standing on that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's an identity.
Yeah.
You are identified by your abuse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I had this sort of reckoning where I'm like, I'm in a hole. I don't know how to get out. I'm tired. I've been working to sort of suss out and to pick apart all of this abuse and to get this shame out. And now I'm too tired to get myself out of this hole.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I wanted to, my poor husband, I put him through it this summer, but I was like, I don't know who I am anymore.
Yeah.
And it feels weird. It feels like wobbly because all of my how I respond to the world at large, to people, has always been through the lens of
Right.
shame.
Right.
And now I'm having to relearn how
Mm-hmm.
to advocate for myself, how to just even be, it's people pleasing, all of that, the little and small things are all connected to it,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what you do. You diminish yourself and to, in service of, well, abuse
Yeah.
or whoever,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying everyone's abusing me, but I'm saying that, I will go low. I will be
Right.
down here. I'll be subservient, um, because that's my worth.
Yeah.
And it's really, that's hardwiring,
Yeah.
and that's behavior. And how do you, so now I've been on this quest, since I feel like I've filtered the shame out, but how do you change behavior when
Yeah.
even if it's not connected to anything anymore? How do you go about changing behavior? And that's really tough.
Well, you definitely don't get to be unconscious anymore. Everything has to
No.
be super conscious, right? Because you don't have that luxury anymore of being unconscious. Everything has to be mindful. But I think you're touching on something really, really pivotal, because I think many people have experienced abuse, whether they're willing to accept it, deal with it, whatever, acknowledge it. And then there's a lot of people who maybe haven't, or really are never going to acknowledge it so they can stay in the place of they haven't. And I think people misunderstand people identifying as survivors or victims of these types of things as like, who are you without this? Like, you're one with it. Like, you're using it as an identity. And the fact is it's not necessarily the identity. It's that I was robbed of my identity
Mm,
when this shit went down. And
mm-hmm,
I don't know who I actually am anymore. So I have to figure it out because this situation happened.
mm-hmm,
And like,
mm-hmm.
that's what I hear when you're talking now. How would Scott, respond to this? Is now, how was Scott without the situation respond to it? And I don't know
Yeah.
what that is yet. And so
Yeah.
I can't just do my defaults, which by the time you get to our age, you would think that we have it fucking figured out, right? Like, no,
Yeah.
now it's brand new. Everything's brand new, right? That's really, really hard. And it's really tedious
Yeah.
and it's really exhausting.
Yeah.
I think it's probably very rewarding if you can get to that part, but it's going to fucking take a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's be clear. From 4 years old till 44, that's a 41-year gap
Yeah.
of not even knowing. So you're operating
That's a lot of habit.
your navigation center that's running the show
Yeah.
is completely shielded
Yeah.
and completely in the dark,
Yeah.
and you have no idea. And I will say, so let's talk about those 41 years in between. There were always problems,
Mm-hmm.
and that sucks to say. I have a hard time talking about that. There were always, I always had health issues,
Right.
stomach issues, I had sinus issues. I had, I really believe that the body is always trying to tell you something. And um, it's funny because I don't have that anymore.
Wow.
You tell me,
Right.
you
There's
know?
some very interesting research on what you're talking about. If you have experienced trauma, I highly recommend the book, The Body Keeps a Score. I think that's the title. I will link it.
Okay.
And then also anything by Gabor Mate. He's a very, very accredited doctor who also deals in trauma and whatnot. And he's very big on autoimmune's connection to
Yeah.
trauma and stuff like that. What you're talking about is real. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of evidence behind that in
Oh,
the,
absolutely.
yeah, medicinal
I've
field.
been to polarity experts. Polarity is the study of energy in your body. And this is what the Chinese understood
Mm-hmm.
so well
Mm-hmm.
3,000 years ago, is that blocked stored energy creates
Mm-hmm.
problems and
Yeah.
ailments and stuff.
Yeah.
But there was other problems, just like it's your own when you are constantly projecting abuser or abuser. You have overreactions of things. My poor husband, I mean, thank God I married a saint. I mean, he's been the most patient person. But there's when I say there's always drama, because you don't know why you're
Yeah.
drama. You don't know why, because you're, first of all, stunted as a 4-year-old. Let's talk
And
about that.
you're in survival.
Yeah, you're in survival always. And so triggers are really, they're true.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you don't know why you're being triggered, you're not conscious in that
Mm-hmm.
on that in that area. You're not conscious. I was so unconscious for so long. I mean, first of all, I numbed myself for how long? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I with mostly marijuana was always, but I
Mm-hmm.
was always stoned.
Mm-hmm.
These are reasons why it took 41 years,
Wait, do you
because
remember?
self-preservation. What? Yes. What?
We're gonna go off.
Probably, probably not.
We're just gonna go take a sharp right because I just remembered something. We might edit this out, or we might just keep it. Do you remember that job we did for New Year's in San Diego?
Yeah.
And we partied after the job. We all got hotel room. The job gave us hotel rooms at like a shitty
Yes.
Holiday Inn or something.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And we were drinking. And this was probably peak in my eating disorder. So I was not eating. So drinking, right? So you get super hammered. And then I decided to take a hit of whatever weed you guys had, which
Probably me.
I
Yeah.
know better. Back when I was that was the most of my partying. I never did
Yeah.
any hard drugs. That's not a brag. I'm just like that much of a control freak. I'm that scared of like real shit. But like I took a hit of that weed and that shit put me out.
Oh yeah.
And
Just the
then you
spins.
felt so bad. You were like, you guys were such
Uh,
assholes. Why did we do that to her? Like, I don't even know why you thought it was your responsibility. I just remember you being so sweet about it because I actually don't
uh,
remember you as a stoner at all. But right when you said that, that memory came back and I'm like, that's hilarious. I remember that job. I don't even know, where were we, at a casino? Did we perform at a casino, like a dry
it was one of
casino?
those. It was one of those.
Was it at
Like
Michael Chambers' job?
Yes, Michael Chambers reservation casinos.
And it was a dry casino and they wouldn't let us stay there.
Uh, I definitely remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, most people actually that don't know that I was, I smoked so much pot.
Because you're so functional. You
I
don't give
know,
pothead energy.
I know. I
No
really never
offense,
did.
but potheads aren't known for being like on time, with it, fast
Totally.
talking, very, like,
Which is probably why I sustained it for so long.
yeah, yeah,
This
yeah,
closet functional stoner.
yeah.
Yeah,
When you
just
talk
kept me
about,
numb. Kept me numb.
yes, right? It did its job. And when you talk about like the grief that comes up about the health stuff, like I hear so much sadness in lost time and
Hmm.
frustration, right? And I think one thing I've always noticed about myself and other people when they start going through rings of fire of recovery is the unthawing of grief that comes up, right? Like
Mm.
it's like all of this grief just unthaws. And like for a while, it feels really bad and terrible. Like you're never going to get out of it. Like you're never going to mourn it enough. Like you'll never be happy again. Like you'll never be able to get out of it. And if you keep with it, you do come out of it. At least that's what I've seen in people and in myself so far. Um, but I think there's like so much grief that has to be felt through these stages because of those things. Like you're grieving so many things. You're grieving
Yeah.
who you were as a person. You're grieving like all the time and frustration and money you spent trying to get these mysterious ailments to be fixed when it was this one thing that was
Yeah.
unjust to you, that was
Yeah.
done unjustly, right?
Yeah.
I think that's such a huge part of recovery is that kind of grief and uncovering all the little griefs and all the little sadnesses, you know?
Yeah. There's a really weird, I mean, the way that it connects. Well, first of all, on that note right there, yeah, I mean, I especially after this last summer where I felt like I got to this new place, even though it was exhausting. I just have this. I just want to live life this second half. If I'm so lucky to live, for another half, I want to live with such clarity and with such purpose, and with it's this whole other what I never had before. I
Mm-hmm.
never had. I was always sort of like in survival mode, just sort of getting through. And I just want to live, without being cheesy, my best life without all of that baggage dragging that around.
Mm-hmm.
I just it's kind of exciting, and that's because I'm only after this is after I felt the grief of like, oh, that whole first half of my life, I mean, is gone, and it's like but now I'm like, okay, let's change, let's reframe it. Now I get to step into this second half, you know, with completely, unbothered by all of that stuff. And shame is out the door. And, I'm still learning how to be without shame with a capital S, but
Yeah.
it's getting better and better each day.
Yeah. I,
But
yeah, go ahead.
go ahead, go ahead.
Nope. You.
I was, and then, in terms of like how this affects your career, there was a real sobering moment that I had, I don't know, about a year and a half ago or something, where I realized that sort of that moment of oh, I'm just trying to fill, if I had all the, if when I get this, or if I can only get this money, if I get it was, I lived in the future so much I could never be present
Mm-hmm.
because that's too hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's so there was this real moment that I had of, oh my God, I am one of those people that I could diagnose, and other people that do what we do are in the
Mm-hmm.
business, in the
Mm-hmm.
industry. They're all just here trying to fill with accolades
Right.
or resume and I'm like, I am that projection.
Mm.
I am that I am one of these people that has a graveyard inside that is trying to fill it with, you know,
Mm.
and that was a real big moment for me because I think this industry is chock full of people
Of hurt
that are
children.
of wounded people,
Yeah.
and
Well, who else wants to
the
put themselves in front of everybody and be like, "Do you like me? Do you like me? Clap
totally,
for me, please." And if you don't,
yes.
I'll be crushed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for me specifically, that looked like hire me, like me. And I'd get in front and I would sabotage myself. I'm the worst at auditions, or I always was I was self sabotaging. It was
Mm.
sort of like, no, I'm not worth it. I'm not worth it. I'm not worth it. At time and time and time. I don't know how much I don't know how I did work so much. It was never through
Well, because you're
auditions.
fantastic. Number
That
one. Let me no,
that
let me just
but
tell.
it's
So
interesting, because it was never through auditions. It was always because I would finally get a job with someone and they would rehire me.
but I mean, that's kind of how it goes as you get older. You audition less and less, and it's more of through referral and recommendation and relationships. So that was
That's
like a
true.
natural progression. But for people who don't know Scott, he's an incredible dancer and performer. Incredible. He's also very beautiful. And so there's a lot of reasons why you got hired. And I want to say two things. I love that you're talking about shame because I relate to that very deeply. Because although I don't have the same experience of you, my default emotion is shame for everything. I mean, everything. Literally, if I am late, shame. If I almost get in a car accident, shame. If I miss an appointment, shame. If I I mean, everything, from the biggest things to the smallest things, my default emotion is always shame.
Yeah.
And that has been so hard to try to change. And it's gotten so much better, but it is still there. It is literally my first emotion, my first response to everything is shame. And it's something that I don't care for and I'm trying to fix. I love that you talked about that. You also said a little bit ago that, you were always, you want the next portion of your life to be inspiring and go deep and all these things. And I just want to say, as someone who is objective to your process and someone who's experienced you many times over time and space, and not only has experienced you in the professional realm, but also on many opportunities socially and intimately, um, I have always seen you as that.
Mm.
So the interesting thing is, as much as I'm sure as these things happen to us, we're like, who would I have been? You to me have always been that. So whatever you want to be outwardly, eh, that's you. That's your observation. But my experience of you, you have always been more deep and willing to have a conversation about something deep. You have always also been always really funny when the time called, very appropriately funny and light, and always really good at what you do, but that's part of overachieving, right? Is to cover up all the things, right?
Mm.
But that that's who I've always seen you as. Like the show you did, that's nothing but courageous and inspiring. Like nobody puts that much time and effort and putting themselves out there in that way that doesn't have that deep seated, inspirational, courageous spirit. So, I mean, I think the next part of your life, if I could be so audacious, is to say that you will see that for yourself. But we've all seen it around you. And I'd be hard pressed
Mm.
to find anyone who I don't think sees that.
I think that's actually the nugget right there, right?
Mm.
Is it's so cliche, but you kind of have to see it yourself, feel it yourself, believe it yourself. Um, I want that for me too.
Yeah.
I do.
I want to see what comes of it because the last thing I saw on that broad scale, and every time I talk to you, is great.
I will tell you this. There's a story in this that for whatever reason about me, I don't know. I don't mind talking about these things,
Mm-hmm.
about what happened to me. I don't. It's. I mean, is it scary knowing this is going out? A little bit, but I don't. I don't mind. I don't mind it. Just like I did that show about sort of escaping and coming out and deprogramming from Mormonism. Um, I feel compelled to be a voice
Mm-hmm.
because you might not have the same circumstances or same specificity as me, but people can relate to these things. I think I think it's very common. I think my story with um, what happened at the hands of my uncle is especially this was a 1979 turning into 80. Um, Especially then with little
No one's
boys.
talking
It's
about stuff
no
like
one's
that.
talked about, but it happened.
Mm-hmm.
It happened. And here we come back to the link of sort of Mormonism. I think, may I this is my opinion, this is my experience. And so I hope I don't, turn off any listeners here, but I think this sort of insidious behavior is very common in Mormonism. You're talking about a religion that was built with sexual assault
Mm-hmm.
towards young girls,
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, sexual predatory, and covered up and never talked about.
Right. I mean,
This
I
was
think
as religion that it festered. This was I don't think my uncle invented this. I
of
think it
course.
happened to him and
Right.
to him his whoever abused him before that. I know these things now.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pattern. It's built into my DNA.
Mm-hmm.
All of us that would come from, the motherland of Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
Um, and it's gross and it needs to be talked about. And I can be a voice for that. And
Mm-hmm.
there will be another show. I guarantee you.
Mm. I'm very much looking forward to it. I think
With
there's,
comedy.
yeah, here we go. Let's laugh at tragedy. That's true
Yeah.
comedy.
Yeah.
It's, I think any situation where there is a power imbalance and, you know, religion is a really good opportunity for there to be power imbalances and some kind of a fear tactic, right? Afterlife, whatever it is, uh, prophecies, chosen people, all of the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's why we see it in everywhere, right? We see it a lot in religion, right? Catholic. I was raised Catholic. Luckily, I was not in any of those situations that happened with the church, but I was aware of it and concerned about it as a kid. It was kind of
Mm-hmm.
well known. It wasn't until later it came out, but it was kind of always well known, unfortunately. And
Wow.
we see it in our industry, right, where there's a lot of power and money, and people do what they want to do because they have absolute power. Um, so I'm hoping that that era is coming to an end across the board. That the people who would be empowered to do those things are not able to reach and attain that kind of power or have access to do the things they're doing. And I know for sure that one of the ways we can change that is to speak it
Yeah.
and to keep speaking it and to be really loud about it so that other people can be really loud about it and other people can speak about it and to basically create an epidemic of truth, right?
Yeah.
And shine lights on it so that people don't feel ashamed. There are people who need to feel ashamed. They are not the ones being abused, right?
Yeah.
There are
Right.
people who need to be afraid. They are not the ones being abused.
Yeah.
And that dynamic should shift. And
Yeah.
people who are doing the abusing should feel that heat. Like they
Yeah.
should be afraid that, their secrets are going to come to light, that we're not going to keep those types of secrets anymore.
What is the antidote to shame? Bring it out into the light,
Yes.
sunlight.
Yes.
And I have, as soon as I started processing and piecing this all together, I started telling, my husband first, obviously, but having conversations with all, the people that are nearest and dearest to me. I just feel this need to listen. That saying, "You're only as sick as your secrets."
Yes.
Man, talking about even if it was really hard for the first couple times of saying out loud, which it was, like
Yeah.
to find the voice. It was like, it
Especially
was.
your voice was so
No.
affected, right? To be able
Mm-hmm.
to speak after you've had so much throat stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Neck stuff. The bridge between the heart and the mind. The
Yeah.
creativity center.
Yes. I think even as hard as it was, the the it's a lot easier than I think about the 40 years before that,
Mm-hmm.
right? All the havoc that was happening, that unbeknownst to me, but again, just sort of writing on the wall the whole time. There were so many things that just flicked.
Mm-hmm.
So that was hard when I think back, so this is sort of the, it's not easy part. That's not the right word, but it's healing. It's part of the process for me. I I don't I don't ever want to keep it inside ever again.
Right. Do you feel
You know
like
what
you
I'm
have
saying?
freedom? Like more freedom?
Yes.
Like your filter is off. You don't have to like think about everything before you do it. And I mean, there's introspection in different ways because you're trying
Yeah.
to work on people pleasing and all the things. But the freedom, that's what I've found anyways, is that I was for a really long time, I would have been mortified for anyone, especially in my professional life, to know that I struggled with an eating disorder, to know that I,
Mm.
had abortions, to know that like any of those things, like those were secrets I kept so close to my heart. Like I would have taken them to the grave if it just didn't become too much after a while and I had to like kind of unpack everything, right? My life wasn't working anymore and I was numbing out in all these different ways, right? So it was like well, eating disorder is a way to numb out, period. But, you know, I thought that if I told people these things, if they knew these things about me, they would think badly of me. They would think I was weak or weird or bad or whatever. I don't know. I would be so embarrassed about all of it. And I'm not sure why, but the shame, right? The shame, the shame. And when I started talking about it, not only did people not do the things I thought, which was like they were going to say, well, how do you know? Like they wouldn't believe me for some reason first. Like that was the first thing I thought,
Right.
is that nobody would believe it because I was so functional, or because I wasn't super super skinny and hospitalized, or because like all these things, that they just wouldn't believe it. And then when I started talking, people not only believed me, but they were like, oh my god, me too, or oh my god, I relate. And
Right.
then to feel like I started feeling like my vulnerability was such a detriment to me, but once I started talking, I felt bulletproof. I felt like nothing could get me.
Yeah.
It was what I always wanted, right? By keeping the secrets, I was like, if I keep these secrets, I will be bulletproof. But that was like, I was literally translucent. Like everything could get to me. And then I
Mm.
started like, being really honest about all the stuff, and just like telling it and saying it and doing it and whatever. And at any point, if it came up, it came out and whatever. And I literally started feeling untouchable. It was the complete opposite of what I had thought.
Yeah.
And I hope that is and becomes your experience as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting because these secrets, when once out, I think they're the things that kind of connect us in a much deeper way
Mm-hmm.
to people. So the opposite of like the curated Instagram, TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
We think we're connecting that way.
Right.
We are getting so much distance between all of us, and it's the humanity.
Yeah.
It's the humanity. I think that sort of and this it's also the gift of the awfulness
Yeah.
of what happened, of the
Yeah.
trauma. It's the it's it and there's that part of it too. If you can see your way through and process through all of the shit and the shame and the grief and the this and the this, and you can get, I really believe that you can get to this place of gratitude, and that is the best medicine against it. And it's hard. And I'm not saying that I've gotten that to all areas of the abuse, but I've gotten to a lot. I've actually seen, okay, because this happened, blah, 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 or whatever. And I have nothing but gratitude for that. Or even just the general, I'm like, well, here I am and I'm okay. And I actually love my life.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there's gratitude in that.
Yeah.
So it helps me not to wallow, because there's that stuff comes up stuff sometimes
Yeah.
where I want to wallow and I want to be sad about.
Yeah. The little griefs that come up. Yeah.
Yeah, but
That's normal.
you know I also recognize that every step of the way I had, you want to call them better angels, you want to call them um spirit guides, you want to call them angels among us. I've been surrounded by goodness.
Mm-hmm.
you know um I was lucky. I was really lucky because that 4-year-old boy, it didn't have to turn out the way that it did. It could have gone a much different way, you know, because that stuff can kill people,
Mm-hmm.
be it through, heavy drugs or prisons
Right.
or continuing the abuse, whatever.
Yep.
It, it,
How do
it,
you
it
numb the
just,
pain? Yep.
yeah, it just, that it could have killed me.
And it's
And it
also
starts,
dream killers. It's a dream killer.
yeah,
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Any kind of abuse is which is kind of, I don't want to be so bold to say that that might be the worst, is the abuse that takes place that kills dreams, right?
mm, yeah, yeah. So, I just, I always had good people around me.
Yeah.
And maybe that speaks to who I am at the core. Maybe that speaks to maybe people wanted to take care of me because I was a wounded child. There was always a wounded child that was present within me. I don't know, but it kept me. It kept me on the path that got me here, which is I'm doing okay. Doing actually
Yes, you're
more than
very
okay.
likable too. As much as you felt bad, 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 you're very good, good, good. People very much like you.
I mean, I don't know about that. I can't. I
That's
don't
true.
know, but
That is true.
I
I've never heard anybody
I'll
say
just
one
say
bad thing
thank you.
about
I'll
you,
just say thank you.
and I hear all the gossip.
Oh no, there's definitely people
No,
that
no, I haven't. Nope, not one thing ever. Anybody, I bring your name up.
no.
Ah, I love Scott Hislop. Everybody loves Scott Hislop. Everybody does. Yeah, so you're very well loved amongst everybody I've talked to. So I have, there's a
Yes,
tradition on the podcast, as you know, because we're going to wrap you up. I'm trying to keep the pod in a tight hour and then it's long
I know.
and arduous. So I say we don't give advice on the podcast, but do you have any suggestion for anyone who might be suffering right now?
If you're, I think just listen to that inner voice. If you were like me 4 years ago, where you're like, wait a minute, what is this? And just listen to your inner voice, your inner wisdom, whatever you want to call it, your consciousness, conscience.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to it, and as scary it is, walk towards it. Because if you get to the other side, um, you reap all the benefits. I'm so glad I walked towards it. I've done nothing. My life has been nothing but sort of reveal itself of all the goodness that I couldn't see, that I wouldn't see, that I um, failed to see, um, or failed to manifest. Um, all of that is because I walked towards the darkness, the pain, the fear. Um, so that's what I would say. And get just yeah, it's like you said, get yourself in a program, get yourself therapy, surround yourself with the people that love you. And because I had that support system.
Yeah, support is everything. I will
It's
always put
everything.
links about sliding scale therapy in California and Psychology Today links to find accessible therapy. So always check the links at the bottom of the podcast because I try to give as many links and help and things that are in relation to the subject matter.
Good.
Scott, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My God.
No,
Thank you. Thank you for telling me in last February, that you were ready to talk because I was like, I have got to take him up on that because he is amazing. I'm so, so grateful for you as a friend, as a peer, as a coworker, as a podcast. Like, you're just fantastic. And I'm
no.
really, really grateful for you telling your story and imparting your wisdom in your process and your recovery here on Gray Maybe.
Thank you. I hope I wasn't all over the place. I tend
No,
to.
and
I'm
listen, this
not
is the funny,
concise.
but that actually is what makes it amazing. Like, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, the more concise someone is, it's great. But when someone is speaking truly from their own experience and they are everywhere, that's how people
Mm,
relate. They're like, oh, yeah, that I feel like that. Yeah. Like, it
mm,
is, it's very endearing. And you told your story perfectly.
no. Thank
And
you.
I
Well, thank
lot
you
of
for having me.
people, I think a lot of people are going to very much relate.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Before I decided to do this season, in conversation with Scott, he had told me in a hushed voice amongst a room full of people, when you do the topic of abuse, I'm ready to tell my story. His words have hung in my mind since, and he was the first person I thought of when deciding this season's theme. I'm ready to tell my story. One of the most moving sentences to hear for me personally. Being ready to share your story is a milestone and obviously not one to take lightly, As Scott has and can attest, it doesn't mean you're excited to tell your story or happy to tell your story or even not completely terrified to tell your story. I'm so in awe of his courage and his self-seeking spirit. Scott has always just been such a beacon of light in the industry and out of the industry to me. Every time I'm around him, the sun is shining, and I know I'm not the only one who feels this way about him. His introspection, artistry, sarcasm, and smarts, paired with his professionalism, there's no wonder why he's been so wildly successful and is so universally loved. I can't thank him enough for spending his time with me on Gray Maybe. If you're listening to this episode and you have or are currently experiencing abuse, I'm sorry and welcome. I hope this helps your journey. You're not alone. Just a reminder for anyone who needs to hear it. The definition of abuse is when someone causes us harm or distress. It can take many forms, ranging from disrespect to causing someone physical or mental pain. It can occur in someone's home, a care home, a hospital, or a public place. Often, the people who commit abuse are taking advantage of a special relationship. The legal definition of abuse is as follows. The term abuse means the knowing infliction of physical or psychological harm, or the knowing deprivation of goods or services that are necessary to meet essential needs, or to avoid physical or psychological harm. You don't need to have been punched in the face or sexually assaulted to experience abuse. Know that whatever you are feeling, there are those among us that have probably felt it too. You are not alone. If you're listening and you have someone you love in your life that is enduring abuse, you are also welcome. You are also not alone. It's hard to watch someone be hurt and feel powerless to help them. I've included various links in the show notes for help and support. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you were able to find something relatable in today's episode. If you'd like to show your support for this podcast, consider donating on Spotify or rate, share, comment, and subscribe. As I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, this is also a social experiment to see if in telling my stories, I can embolden listeners to share their stories. If you'd like to share a story on this topic, anonymous or otherwise, on the podcast, please email greymaybestories@gmail.com. greymaybestories@gmail.com. Thank you to everyone who helped make this Gray Maybe podcast happen. Producer and editor Roderick Barge. Cover photo by Jose Perez. Music licensed by Pixabay. Special counsel Jada Ellingham and Roderick Barge. Special shout out to supporters Patty Olgan and Jeremy McCullen. Until next time, bye for now.